Hey everyone, welcome to another installment of the BDSG Teaching Artist interview series. Today we are bringing on our saxophone teaching artist for the BDSG advancement programs this fall, Matt Evans. Now, I'm so excited to have Matt Evans on the roster this fall. If you don't know, Matt Evans, his resume is long and full of many hefty accomplishments. Not only is he in the U.S. Army Band's Pershing's Own, he also has a DMA in saxophone performance from Eastman. So very accomplished. He also has a master's in music theory pedagogy, and he also studied at Indiana University. So he's got an unbelievable resume and a depth of knowledge that goes far beyond just performing the saxophone. He really understands music, and he brings a lot of great teaching advice to the table. And I also forgot to mention he's a college professor teaching at Virginia Commonwealth, sorry, University. Um, so I'm so thrilled to be able to talk to him today. If you love what you hear here today, please go ahead and give Band Director Survival Guide a like, give this video a share, and you can find us at banddirectorsurvivalguide.com. If you want to learn more about Matt Evans, you can head over there and go to the Teaching Artist tab and click Saxophone. As well, you can find us at Facebook and Instagram at Band Director Survival Guide. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Matt Evans for an interview today. All right, hey everyone, we've got Matt Evans here. Matt Evans is our BDSG teaching artist for saxophone this fall for our advancement programs. So thank you so much for being here, Matt. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of how you got started on the saxophone and a little bit about your career?
Yeah, so I'll start. My main jobs right now, one, I'm a saxophonist in the Army Band. I actually play baritone saxophone in the concert band is my main role as a saxophonist there. But we're all expected to play all the saxophones and to be able to step into the various performing groups in the Army Band. So while I'm the main, the bari sax guy in the concert band, definitely do a lot of playing on the other horns as well. I also am the instructor of saxophone at Virginia Commonwealth University. I've been there, this is my third year, just starting my third year teaching, and I've maintained a private studio for as long as I can remember. But yeah, I do a lot of teaching, and obviously in the Army Band have adapted quite a bit, while the pandemic has been going on. The content that we've been producing is more online. We're doing lots of recording, and so I've stepped into those roles as well in the Army Band. I'm part of our video editing team, and I also am on the Army Band's auditions team, which we may chat about a little bit. Because that's what we're here to discuss with the students. So.
All right, well, why don't we just talk about that a little bit right now? Because auditions are they're such a different skill from just performing. I mean, there's similarities, but it's kind of a different skill to learn how to audition and just getting organized with the whole process of auditioning. Tell us a little bit about your audition experience.
Yeah, so saxophone isn't an orchestral instrument. We do have orchestral excerpts, but as far as being a professional musician, I would definitely say the saxophone has maybe a different experience than most. One thing I did do a lot of when I was in school, and even my first years out of school, was competitions, chamber music competitions in particular. And I would find there's a lot of comparison between the audition experience and that. I mean, obviously, when you're auditioning for a job or auditioning for Allstate, there's a performance opportunity waiting for you on the other side. For a chamber music competition, sometimes, right, that might be part of the prize. But really, in the end, in both challenges, you're trying to play your best and trying to play your best under um, strange circumstances. You have an audition time that's early in the morning, or maybe they're going to give you a warm up room, where you only have 30 minutes to prepare yourself. And then you're waiting outside the room before you walk in. So um, that common element between competing and auditioning is how do you turn on that ability to play super well when you need to. And I would say that's how I won my job in the Army Band. That's a commonality among all the players that I work with every day is, we all had to pass that blind audition to get into our current jobs. And I found, and we also do some pretty, what we do ranges from day in and day out performances that happen on a weekly basis to things of international significance. So there is this element always of when it's time to play, you got to get it right. So I would say that I've thought a lot about as it pertains to me, and I definitely think a lot about it for my students as far as the opportunities that are ahead for them.
Wow, yeah, and that brings up an interesting concept is how do you what kind of techniques do you use to deal with the nerves of something like a performance of international significance? For a lot of people, that would be overwhelming. How do you handle a situation like that?
I actually just yesterday gave a sort of a lecture on this to my students at VCU, and I'm not a specialist by any means. If you really want to go down the rabbit hole, looking into sports and performance psychology, there's a lot that's been uncovered as it relates to the stress musicians deal with. But I'm trying to think the best way to say this. I would say don't try to not be nervous. You should be nervous before something that's really important to you. And again, what's the number one fear of most people? I don't know if it's in the world or just America, but it's public speaking. Going on display in front of other people. Um, I don't really know that the nerves or anxiety will ever truly go away. You're born with an affinity to be in front of a crowd doing things, or you're not. And I'm not sure it ever goes away. The things you can control, and this again, I will probably come back to this as far as like training for auditions. What can you control? What can you actually prepare for? Versus what are the actual unknowns when you walk into an audition or performance situation? With my students, I say the best thing you can do is settle into a really strong fundamentals and basics routine that you use as a daily warm up. Something that you can just return to and hone over time. That not only maintains your playing but improves it, and sort of like I think that in sports they talk a lot about mantras. Like especially if a basketball player walks up to the free throw line, a lot of them have something a little ritual they say or do before they go to shoot the free throw that helps them focus. And I would say there's a lot of parallels in music, in choosing a warm up, taking deep breaths before you walk into the audition room. We as humans, when we're excited and anxious, the last thing we want to do is pause and breathe. And that's actually the best thing you can do, is, give your brain more oxygen and especially if you're a wind player, taking deep breaths, we should always be doing anyway. But
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, the whole idea of thriving in a state of vulnerability and learning to be kind of comfortable with the discomfort of a performance situation is huge. And I do agree. I think these things take time, and it's like training anything. You need to work at it a little bit every day, just like your fundamental music skills. Performance is also a skill. So couldn't agree more. So what are some pieces of advice you give students that are preparing for, in this case, this year, all the auditions in Texas are recorded. Like, what are some advice you give for students when it comes to recording an audition or recording anything in general?
hmm, that's that's tough because recording is such a different um, different type of stress than a live performance. At the very least, when you're in a live audition, it's going to be over and done with. When you're recording, you have that microphone, the little red eye staring at you, and you could do the takes as many times as you want. But then maybe they start getting worse and worse and worse. And you're like, I have all the time in the world, but nothing's happening the way I want it to. So um, I would say, and I've been doing a lot of recording at home lately, like multi-track projects as well. Is in general the still the tried and true prep for performance still stands. Usually the first one you do is going to probably be the best, or maybe a few takes after. So I tell my students when they're recording, get warm up, get yourself ready, prepare like it is actual performance that you're going to give, and do 2 or 3 takes, and then if they don't go well, then you can gear your practice to that and maybe try it again the next day or after you take a break of some kind. But I wouldn't approach it with this sort of infinite possibilities attitude that it seems like we have. I would say, at least to me, it feels like while we've all been at home a lot, during the COVID pandemic, it feels like time is standing still. I would still try and approach a recorded audition somewhat similarly to a live one, if that makes any sense. But
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I would also say one thing I'm guilty of is probably don't wait till the last minute and just do one take. If you have the opportunity, definitely do multiple takes.
I can tell you from experience, working on the Army Band auditions team, a majority of our applications, taped auditions, do come in on the deadline. We obviously have, lots of people applying when the vacancies appear, but that's, again, I think it could be a good thing, it could be a bad thing. I don't think musicians wait till the last minute to do things sometimes. I just think we're never quite ready to send out. It could always be a little better, right? So you just want to wait until you get that exact right take, But you're right. Yeah, if you wait too long to prepare, you can't cram muscle
Yeah.
memory, you can't cram memorization, you can't cram the polish that it takes to going into preparing for something, like an audition. So,
Yeah. So since you're on the audition part of the band, and I correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the U.S. Army Band, you do a tape for the first round, and then you invite like a small group of highly qualified candidates to actually audition live. Like, what are some of those things that you look for that like immediately stick out as good or immediately stick out as not so good on a tape when you're
mm,
listening?
yeah. So, I just to preface, this isn't super important, but as part of running the auditions process on the team, we're not usually involved in the judging. I
Oh,
not for everyone at least. If there's a saxophone vacancy of some kind, or vacancy in the low wind section of the concert band, obviously we're be involved in something like that. But the number one thing I can tell you, just from being involved in the process, is the recording quality matters enormously, and that's sort of, for a lot of people, an unfortunate thing to hear, I think, because recording equipment can be very expensive. Fortunately, now especially, there are so many affordable options for producing a good recording, and software, things to render, bounce, produce a really good sounding product. I will say we've had, like you said, in the pre-screening process, candidates apply, and you can tell in their tape that they're good, but you can't tell how good they are because maybe there's a little fuzz in the sound, or they recorded on their phone instead of some sort of external microphone. And I would just say the when you open up a recording and it's really crystal clear, that anymore is making a huge difference. Um, yeah, that's I actually at VCU with my studio. They're all music ed and music performance majors. I said, there's no better time than now to figure out how to do this. One, make a good recording. Two, create content. because all music right now, most music is online. So um, anyway, that's
Yeah, that's a good point, and it's a good time to make those mistakes. One of my famous oopsies in my past was recording an audition tape, and I didn't know about the auto normalize feature that was
mm,
hidden in GarageBand. And I remember I made this tape and I was like, I know that I played this really, really soft and it sounds so loud. And I like didn't know why, because on the actual recording that I made on the Zoom, it was amazing. And then put it into GarageBand and it's super loud. And my teacher kept emailing me back. He's like, I don't know, I don't know what's wrong with you. Like this isn't soft. Like you need to redo this. And I was driving myself crazy. And I obviously did not get into that audition because I didn't figure it out until after. But little things like that are good mistakes to make when it's a lot's not on the line. I mean, obviously, I would have rather not made that mistake when it was so important. So
yeah,
that's
yeah.
some sound advice. Well, I'd love to ask you some questions just because I'm really curious, and I'm sure a lot of people would love to know about it as well. When it comes to saxophone, you're like percussion, your instrument bridges multiple genres of music. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the distinction between classical saxophone and jazz saxophone and explain kind of, I don't know how in depth you want to go, but maybe the difference in technique or sound a little bit.
Yeah, so I should just state up front, I'm not a jazz saxophonist. Never in my, going to school or performing, don't do a lot of improvisation. And I would just say maybe the main differences are sound concept and equipment. There's a set of instruments and mouthpieces and reed cuts and ligatures and all that classical players tend to gravitate around. And then I feel like the jazz realm is when you start getting into vintage equipment, and jazz history is just so robust. A lot happened in a little period of time, in the 1900s when the jazz boom happened. So there's just so many references, what players do you want to sound like, what was going on with who, when, that. And in the classical arena, it seems to me to be very generational. You can literally trace everyone's teacher to a handful of people in Europe when the saxophone was just becoming to come to light as a classical instrument. It just feels like it wasn't that long ago. Well, it wasn't for the jazz saxophonists either. But the main differences you'll hear I would say, are saxophonists tend to play in more closed mouthpieces. Classical saxophonists, that is, play in more closed mouthpieces. It's a more condensed sound. I don't want to compare it to the clarinet because I don't think it sounds like the clarinet at all. But on a jazz setup, you're going to have a wider tip opening on the mouthpiece. Usually, a lot of jazz saxophonists will relax their lower jaw a lot more, which ends up creating like a bigger, brighter, more vibrant tone, designed for just the sheer amount of flexibility you need when playing jazz. And obviously in classical style playing, trying to get all the notes on the page just the way you want. I would just say that's it's maybe a little more condensed. I don't know. I feel like no matter how I try and say this, it's going to it could ruffle someone's feathers, but
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, uh, music is a tradition, right? Passed down from teacher to student over hundreds, even thousands of years, depending on the instrument you're playing, and um, the I don't know. I think classical saxophone is in a cool place right now, because we have a lot of repertoire. But then you see us everywhere in chamber music. There are orchestral excerpts, in wind ensemble and band. And then, of course, the saxophone will always be associated with rock and jazz. That's, like you said, what most people think of. So,
Yeah, I think saxophone and percussion kind of share a similarity in that
Hmm.
orchestral repertoire didn't really involve us very heavily until the 1900s, as more pieces started to incorporate that. And I'm a percussionist posing as a saxophone historian here, but I believe American in Paris was one of the first major saxophone works for you guys.
Yeah, and
Um,
actually, um, so, well, what Gershwin did for jazz, people say he brought jazz to the concert hall, and man, his orchestral works are just like orchestration masterpieces. Even if you're not a huge jazz fan, listening to American Paris or Rhapsody in Blue is still, I think, an enjoyable experience. But you're right that the way he used it, the saxophone, it's so iconic. What you hear in orchestral works before Gershwin is the use of a saxophone, almost like akin to vaudeville, like for an effect, or and really showing the instrument for what it is as a classical vehicle. That did start to happen more at that period in the 1900s. But
yeah, yeah. Same with the xylophone was just a ragtime vaudeville instrument, and really started to find its footing as a serious concert instrument after that. So, another this is just another non-saxophonist question, but um, could you explain a little bit of the distinction between the different ranges of saxophone and if there's a strong technical difference or fingering difference in how you approach them?
yeah,
Like that.
sure thing. And now's a good time to note too. A lot of uh, musicians, when they think of classical saxophone, I think it tends to gravitate to alto and soprano as the voices. I mean, most saxophone music majors, the traditional standard repertoire is on alto. Obviously, that is changing as time goes on. Soprano being the highest voice, also, as saxophone is a melodic instrument, soprano is very common. I actually specialize in the lower horns. I like playing in tenor and bari. I always have. And then, of course, I play bari sax in the Army Band. I play bari sax in Project Fusion, and then tenor saxophone in the Zizix Quartet. And as far as technique goes, they transpose so that when you're playing, a G or a C on any saxophone, it's the same fingering on all the others. I will say, because I do play all four quite often, there are differences between the embouchure, between the setup. You would think if you played a certain model mouthpiece on alto that you could buy that same model mouthpiece for all the others and things would be great. But I found that that's not often the case usually. Even the setups can vary from horn to horn. So um, yeah, I would, as a classical player, the different voices have different roles, just like SATB in a chorus setting almost. But as far as the technique of playing, working on fundamentals, fingerings, and all that, if you're working on one saxophone, it'll translate to the others with a little extra work to get used to that new voice.
Awesome. Awesome. Um, I'm gonna segue back towards auditions. No, it's not a smooth segue, but I'd love to hear a little bit about, I mean, anyone that holds a position like you has achieved a certain level of proficiency in their audition preparation and in their planning. And I was wondering if you could shed some light on kind of your process for going from here's the pieces I need to learn for this audition to audition day. And you can give us kind of like the bird's eye view, but
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, okay. For me, well, okay. I like to play a lot of things from memory. This is not something I suggest all my students do. But through that process of memorizing a lot, and actually, I might make the recommendation if you want to have a really successful audition, the all-state excerpts usually aren't that long, or even for college auditions, things like that. The extra step of memorizing a small chunk of music, like committing it completely to memory and heart, you know it that much better. And I would say, in general, a professional performing musician, even if you have the music in front of you when you're on stage, you should still know it well enough that you're glancing at the music to help you out, not like you're reading in real time along with it. So, what I found is I like to have things down completely the way I want 3 days before I have a big performance. If I'm still working on anything or still worried about memorizing, I have found if I'm not like goal oriented where I want to be, literally 72 hours before the performance is, then it might be mental, but it just doesn't go as well as it could have. So I like sort of obviously in the Army we have to pass a fitness test, and when we get ready for that test, I usually have some sort of weekly training program, in mind, and I do something similar in music as well. It's like I want to have maybe if this is my goal tempo, here's where I want to be 2 weeks before that event or 1 week from now. Manageable long and short term goals that you can sort of check off and check along the way. And then being where you want to be, having a level of execution days before the audition, then not to do a bunch of repetitive practice, but touch up, and actually, again, to reference sports and performance psychology, they say the worst thing you can do, and we don't like to do this as humans, the worst thing you can do is do something over and over and over again right before you need to do it in front of other people. It literally it tires the neurons firing in your brain. It tires your ability to rely on muscle memory. So slow practice the day before or the day of the audition before you play. We don't like to do that, right? It's like if you're carrying something expensive around in your bag or you're traveling and you want to make sure your passport's there, you keep checking on it, right? You want to keep touching it, make sure that what you've been working on is still where you left it. And that takes practice, that takes experimentation. Again, finding that routine that works for you. But that's what we're there for as teachers, right? Is to help, show you what we do that helps, but also we have, again, that bird's eye view of how you learn. And so how we can help set you up so you feel good about a performance. So.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's almost like a gap conversation. Like the student sees where you are and they want to get where you are, and they're here, and you're trying to show them how to get from where they are to get to where you are, and trying to show them that like that gap is long and there's a lot of hard, consistent work that goes into it. That's something that I don't know if this is a problem you encounter a lot, but as a percussionist, most beginner students or high school students that I get when I first get them, they've usually watched a lot of drummers just shredding on drum
Mhm.
set or just playing really fast. And so every student, like the first thing is they're like, I want to be able to play this fast. And so they just want to go from 0 to 100 like in a week or two. And I was wondering if like how do you get a student to buy in to slow practice, to buy into those fundamentals so that you can actually get them to get where they want to go, even though they don't want to do all those steps usually.
Yeah, that's a what you're describing, I think, is sort of a side effect of what happened many years ago when Guitar Hero first came out, right? It's like you pick up this gadget, and today it could be an app of some kind, and you're looking at a set of inputs, and it just sounds incredible what you're producing. Like, oh my, I sound like a lead guitarist, and I only have 5 buttons. The fact of the matter is, it remains, and this is the challenge and the frustration for many people is, it does take a long time to get really good at the technique of an instrument, and so I also don't like getting bogged down in technical exercises either. Always focusing on the musicality. This is why we all want to play an instrument, because we love music, right? And obviously the opportunities we're talking about all contribute to that. Like playing with a really good, set of musicians in the all-state band, or getting into a good music program if you want to audition to be a music major. So Yeah, that the fact stands though. If you play a woodwind instrument, especially, you have to play a lot of notes really fast, really well. So,
Mm.
um, uh, like setting again, not going too fast too soon, and then when you get there, don't repeat it over and over and over again too much. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there because my headphones are dying, so I'm going to plug
Oh
them in.
no.
Maybe you can clarify.
We were we were talking about I was just talking about like how do you get students to buy in to slow practice and um like an example would be like we talk a lot about getting students to buy into to practicing scales and the analogy that Katie and I always use is like music is a collection of scales, arpeggios, seventh chords, all those things. So if you really know all those patterns, it makes it a lot easier to identify them in the music and kind of meaningfully understand the harmonic message and all of that. So I was wondering how you get students to buy into like slow practice because they're just like, I don't want to do that. Like, I just want to have fun. It's,
Hmm.
um,
Yeah, that so again, woodwind instruments. At the very base level, again, this is the kind of comment you make that really ruffles people's feathers. But brass instruments in an ensemble setting generally are for playing loud, right? And woodwind instruments are for playing fast. That's actually how the saxophone was invented. Was Adolf Sax was listening to the orchestra at the time and said, "Hey, I noticed there's this hole. I don't really hear clarity in the low section." So he invented the saxophone, a woodwind designed to play fast down low. So uh, for me as a saxophonist, a woodwind instrument, acquiring technique like what you're saying, scales and patterns, is just part of the deal, right? And that doesn't mean okay when we're talking about scales and patterns that immediately sounds dull and time consuming. I like to make things fun. There are some really great books of etudes out there, that you can be learning and drilling technique, that isn't just playing arpeggios, scales up and down. And then the second question you said, how do you get your students to buy into slow practice? And I will just tell you, teaching at VCU, especially where I have students getting ready for juries and recitals, they're they're always so hesitant. It's like, well, why would I suddenly change the way I've been preparing all of a sudden now before this big performance? And I said, well, this is why you're in school. You're here to try things out and to learn. How this could apply to a student, like you said, you mentioned your audition experience, submitting that tape, and like, man, I'm never going to get that back. Like, that's like how you can avoid that. Okay, so don't make your first recording, right before it's due. Actually, in my teaching now, because a lot of it's online due to the pandemic, I make 15 minutes of recording a requirement for all my students. That's been really helpful, because I can hear what they sound like, absent of any Zoom or streaming processing going on. But I can tell it's added to their routine this element of, oh, I have to press the record button and it has to sound good. And so I would say, buying into it doesn't mean the Hail Mary pass right before the tape's due. There are ways to try it out, before, to find a routine that works for everybody leading up to these auditions.
yeah, that's great. The only reason I ask is because I know a lot of teachers struggle with these things with students is how to get them to practice, how to get them excited about recording something, all those things. So it's always nice to hear how people get their students to really buy into it because that sort of inspiration is so paramount to teaching, is really being able to give that inspiration. So,
Yeah.
well, that's great. I'm trying to think. Do you have any other words of advice for students or teachers that are preparing tapes for this fall, or any just words of encouragement you'd like to add?
Yeah, I okay. This is gonna sound like funny advice because this is the advice I give to my students that have auditioned for music school, right? And I guess in one hand, maybe an audition for an all-state program is similar, right? You go in front of the judge and they give you a score, and the end result, determines your acceptance into the school, or maybe have some scholarship ramifications. But what I tell all my students that say they want to be music majors from that moment on, I said, scales win scholarships. The first thing that the judge or the audition panel usually hears you play when you walk in is they'll ask for a few scales, and how confidently and how fluidly and how prepared the student is on their scales. If it's really well executed, then you kind of perk your ears up. You're like, okay, I'm really intrigued to hear what's about to come next. Versus when most students go in, well, not most, but scales and patterns and all that stuff we talked about, like being the hard things to motivate people to do. Those students out there that don't take private lessons and aren't getting the coaching that we sort of have to offer. Might not spend as much time. They kind of go through them, and I would just say sitting in on a lot of auditions over the years, solo and ensemble, things like that. When a student really nails their scales, it makes a huge difference in how the rest of the audition goes. So that's probably funny advice for something like this, but yeah, those fundamentals super important. So
I think it's great. I think it's great advice because if you think about it, like whether or not it's good or not, like we all make first impressions, and that
hmm
those first few things that you hear are gonna kind of set the precedent for how you listen to the rest of the audition. And if things go smoothly right at the beginning, you're gonna be more interested in like, oh, this is really good. Let's hear what else is gonna happen. And you're not gonna be listening necessarily as critically. You're going to be more forgiving as things go on. And I think that's big. I'd love to give a shout out. That was one thing I learned too from Javon Gilliam, the principal timpanist of the National Symphony Orchestra. He always said, "Even hands, paid hands," and that was his mantra for drumming. If
yeah,
you can get both your hands to sound the same, you can probably hold down a job.
hmm,
Um,
that's
so
great.
it's a good parallel there. Well, that's great. I think that about covers it for today. I just wanted to give a huge thank you to you for coming on. Matt over here he's an incredibly accomplished musician, very busy, plays in many chamber groups and in the army band. And also you also know a lot about music theory. You have a
Mm.
master's in music theory as well. So just the amount of knowledge you bring to the table and to our students this fall is amazing. So thank you so much for being here, and we look forward to hearing more from you in the future here. So thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, you're gonna make me blush. Thanks.
All right. Well, we'll see you later.
All right. Take care.
All right. I hope you guys enjoyed that interview with Matt Evans. What an incredible resource for saxophone, but also just for audition advice and music in general. Matt Evans, he's got so much experience with teaching and with performing, both with his university job as a saxophone professor and also through the U.S. Army Band. He does a lot of the audition packet construction as well as does a lot of his own recording and editing of his own projects. He's a member of the Zizix Quartet as well, so he's got a wealth of knowledge in both band performance, orchestral performance, and in chamber music settings. Can't wait for you to see more of what he's got in store for the fall. So if you found yourself really inspired by what he said and you want your students to work with him, go ahead and head over to the banddirectorsurvivalguide.com and check out the teaching artist tab and go ahead and read more about Matt Evans there. In addition, if you liked what you heard today, go ahead and give us a like or give us a share. And if you want to get more information from us, definitely give us a like on Facebook at Band Director Survival Guide, or follow us on Instagram at Band Director Survival Guide. And we hope you enjoyed this interview today, and we can't wait to see you as we introduce a couple more of our teaching artists. We've almost got the full roster introduced, and we are just so excited to bring this project to fruition to help music education this fall. So thanks so much for being here, and we will see you next time.